in the shadowed cradle of the eternal winter, where the moon wept silver tears upon the frozen earth, a single drop of blood bloomed like a forbidden rose against the snow. Alara's breath fogged the air as she stumbled through the howling gale, her bare feet numb against the jagged ice that clawed at her soles. The rejection had come swift as a blade's kiss, the Alpha King's decree echoing in her mind like the toll of a distant bell. You are no longer of this pack, healer of shadows. Begone, lest your cursed blood taint us all. She had been the Omega they once whispered of in awe, the vampire-touched wanderer whose veins carried the elixir of life, drawn from ancient rites under the blood moon. But awe had curdled into fear when the pups began to wither, their tiny bodies racked by a plague that no wolf's howl could banish. They blamed her, the outsider with fangs hidden behind full lips, her skin pale as moonlight, and eyes that gleamed with an unnatural crimson hue when hunger stirred. Now, exiled to the forsaken fringes of the Frostfang Mountains, Alara clutched the symbol that had marked her since birth. A delicate silver collar etched with lunar phases, its central pendant a vial of her own blood, crystallized and glowing faintly like captured starlight. It was her mother's legacy, a talisman against the thirst that warred within her. Half wolf, half vampire, a hybrid abomination in the eyes of the purebloods. The wind whipped her tattered cloak around her like vengeful spirits, carrying the distant weavos of the pack, warnings perhaps, or merely the mountain's lament. Snowflakes stung her cheeks, melting into rivulets that traced the curve of her jaw, tasting of salt and sorrow. She had healed so many before, warriors clawed in border skirmishes, elders fading into the long sleep. Her blood, drawn in secret rituals, mended what claws and fangs could not. But the king, Thorn Blackthorn, had turned from her, his golden eyes hardening with the weight of his crown and the guilt of a realm unraveling. The path ahead blurred into a white abyss, the forest of ancient pines bowing under the burden of ice, their branches groaning like the ribs of some colossal beast. Alara's legs trembled, not from the cold that seeped into her bones, for her vampire blood burned it away like mist before dawn, but from the ache of betrayal. She had loved him once, in the quiet way of Omegas, serving without demand, her heart a silent flame in the shadow of his throne. Thorn, the Alpha King whose mane of dark hair fell like midnight over broad shoulders scarred from battles long past, had been her quiet confessor. In the flickering light of the great hall's hearth, he had confessed his doubts, the endless wars with rival packs, the betrayal of his beta who schemed in the underbelly of the court, the fear that his rule was but a fragile dam against the flood of chaos. She had offered her ear, her touch, even a drop of her essence to ease his hidden wounds. But when the pups fell ill, his own heirs among them, fragile whelps with fur as soft as down, superstition poisoned the air. "Vampire witch!" they snarled, dragging her from the healing dens, their claws grazing her arms but never drawing blood. Only Thorn's voice had stayed their hands from murder, banishing her instead to this frozen death. She collapsed against a boulder slick with rime, her fingers tracing the collar's vial. Inside, the blood swirled lazily, a reminder of the power she both cherished and cursed. It could save lives, knitting flesh and purging toxins, but at a cost. Each offering weakened her, stirring the feral hunger that demanded repayment in kind. The moon hung low, a bloated orb casting its pallid glow over the valley, illuminating the tracks of some large beast in the snow, wolf, perhaps, or something larger, fleeing from the storm. Ilara's heart pounded, a rhythm like distant thunder, as memories flooded her. The warmth of the pup's fur against her palms as she whispered incantations over their fevered forms. Thorn's hand on her shoulder, heavy with unspoken gratitude, before the fear took him. What is redemption, she wondered, if not the choice to heal those who cast you out? The wind carried a faint scent now, smoke, mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Not hers, but fresh, spilled in violence. Rising, she pressed on, the collar warming against her skin as if alive. The trees thinned, revealing a ravine where torchlight flickered erratically, shadows dancing like specters. Voices rose, guttural and urgent. Wolves in pursuit, their howls slicing the night. Ilara froze, her instincts warring. Flee deeper into exile or turn toward the fray? The moon seemed to pulse, urging her forward, a spiritual compass in the chaos. She slipped behind a cluster of ice-crusted boulders, peering into the gorge below. There, amidst the swirling snow, a massive figure staggered, a wolf in half-shift, fur matted with crimson, golden eyes flashing defiance. Thorn. He was alone, cornered by a pack of shadows that moved with unnatural grace, their forms rippling like smoke under the luna's gaze. Betrayers, she knew instinctively, the rival alphas who had long coveted his throne, striking now while the plague distracted the realm. Her breath caught, the collar's vial thrumming against her throat. He had cast her out, yet here he was, bleeding into the snow, his roars fading to ragged gasps. The wind howled louder, carrying his scent, earth and pine, and the sharp bite of desperation. Ilara's hand hovered at her neck, fingers brushing the pendant. To intervene would mean revealing herself, risking the thirst that clawed at her edges. But as his gaze lifted, locking onto the ridge where she hid, a flicker of recognition pierced the storm. Not fear, but something deeper. Guilt, raw and unyielding, like the blood pooling at his feet. In that moment, under the weeping moon, exile cracked open to possibility, the first thread of an unbreakable bond weaving through the frost. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, a wild drumbeat echoing the storm's fury, as Thorn's golden eyes held hers across the ravine. The snow swirled between them like a veil of forgotten oaths, but in that frozen instant, the world narrowed to the raw plea in his gaze. Not command, not the king's iron will, but a vulnerability stripped bare, like flesh flayed by winter's claws. The betrayers closed in, their forms shifting from shadow to sinew, fangs bared in the torchlight that sputtered against the gorge's walls. 5 of them, reeking of the rival Ironclaw pack, their pelts scarred with the marks of old skirmishes, eyes burning with the hunger for a fallen throne. Thorn staggered, his massive frame heaving, blood tracing dark rivulets down his furred chest, staining the snow in patterns that evoked ancient runes of defeat. She should have turned away. The exile's decree burned fresh in her soul, a brand deeper than any claw could carve. He had banished her, his voice like cracking ice when he uttered the words in the great hall, surrounded by the pack's accusing snarls. Your blood is poison now, Ilara. It cannot touch our young. Yet here, in the moon's merciless light, doubt clawed at her resolve. Her fingers tightened around the silver collar, the vial within pulsing with a warmth that seeped into her veins, stirring the dual natures warring within. The wolf's loyalty, fierce and unyielding, and the vampire's cunning, whispering of survival above all. Fear coiled in her belly, cold as the wind that whipped her cloak. But curiosity flickered too, a spark amid the dread. What madness had driven the king into this trap? And why, in his desperation, did his eyes seek her out, as if she were the only anchor in the storm? A guttural snarl ripped from Thorn's throat as he lunged at the nearest assailant, his claws raking through fur and flesh, sending a spray of blood arcing into the night. The metallic tang assaulted Ilara's senses, sharpening her thirst to a razor's edge. She pressed back against the boulder, its ice biting into her palms, grounding her against the urge to descend. The fight blurred into a frenzy of motion, bodies colliding with bone-jarring force, snow exploding in white plumes, howls mingling with the wind's wail. Thorn was a tempest incarnate, his shifts fluid between man and beast, but the wounds from the plague's hidden toll weakened him. The same affliction that had felled the pups now sapped his strength, turning his roars to labored gasps. One iron-claw wolf clamped jaws around his flank, tearing free a chunk of muscle. Thorn retaliated with a swipe that snapped the attacker's neck, but another flanked him, driving him to his knees. Instinct surged through Alara, unbidden and fierce. She could end this. A single drop from her vial, offered in the old rite, might mend him enough to turn the tide. But to reveal herself meant embracing the curse they all feared, the vampire essence that coursed through her like shadowed rivers. Her breath came in shallow bursts, fogging the air as memories flooded her. The king's hand, calloused and warm, brushing hers during a midnight council, his voice low with confession. The weight of the crown is a chain, Ilara. It binds me to choices that scar the soul. She had nodded then, her Omega heart aching for his burden, offering silent solace. Now that ache twisted into something sharper, resentment laced with an unwelcome pull, the mate bond they had both denied, flickering like embers in the gale. The moon crested higher, its silver light bathing the gorge in ethereal glow, casting long shadows that danced like specters of the Deusa's judgment. Ilara's hand trembled at her throat, the collar's chain cool against her fevered skin. Denial warred within her. He was the architect of her ruin, the one who had chosen pack over her, duty over the quiet fire that had kindled between them in stolen moments by the hearth. Yet curiosity gnawed. What secrets hid in his flight? Whispers of court intrigue had reached even the healing dens, the Beta's betrayal, alliances fracturing like ice under pressure, the Pups' plague a weapon forged in shadow. If Thorn fell, the realm would drown in blood, and her exile would mean nothing in the chaos. A cry escaped her lips, soft as a sigh lost to the wind, as Thorn crumpled under a final assault. The iron claws circled, triumphant growls rumbling like thunder in the valley. Panic seized her, overriding fear. She slipped from her hiding place, descending the ridge with predatory grace, her bare feet silent on the snow. The vial glowed brighter now, responding to her resolve, its light a beacon in the storm. As she neared the fray's edge, hidden by a jut of rock, Thorn's head lifted once more, his gaze finding hers through the melee. In that look, denial cracked. Not love, not yet, but a raw acknowledgement, born of shared peril and the unspoken language of blood and moon. She moved then, swift as night itself, her cloak billowing like raven wings. A stone dislodged under her step, clattering into the gorge, drawing the betrayer's eyes. Thorn seized the distraction, surging up with a bellow that shook the pines, his claws finding purchase in the leader's throat. Blood sprayed, hot and vital, and in the chaos, Ilara darted forward, her presence a whisper amid the roar. She reached him as the last iron claw fled into the shadows, their howls fading into retreat. Thorn collapsed against her, his weight immense, breath ragged against her neck. The scent of him enveloped her, pine and earth and the coppery flood of his wounds. Stirring the thirst she fought to chain. "You," he rasped, voice gravel and wonder, golden eyes dimming as blood soaked her hands. "Why?" She pressed the vial to his lips, her heart a storm of fear and fragile curiosity. "Because the moon demands it," she whispered, the words tasting of destiny's bitter edge. The connection ignited, instinctive and denied, a thread pulling taut in the frozen night. As the first drops touched his tongue, warmth bloomed between them, empathy's fragile bridge over the chasm of betrayal. But the thirst stirred within her, a shadow lengthening, and Ilara wondered if this salvation would claim them both. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Ilara's world narrowed to the heat of Thorn's breath against her skin, ragged and hot, as she dragged him deeper into the ravine's shadowed embrace. The snow muffled their steps, a treacherous ally in the moon's unyielding vigil, but the distant howls of the iron claws lingered like echoes of unfinished vengeance. Her arms burned under his weight. The king's massive frame, a burden of muscle and fur, half shifted, his blood slicking her palms in warm, insistent pulses. The vial at her throat hummed, its glow dimming as the first drops of her essence worked their subtle magic, knitting the deepest gashes, staunching the flow that threatened to paint the gorge in crimson runes. Yet the thirst uncoiled within her, a serpent stirring in the pit of her stomach, fangs grazing the edges of her restraint. She shoved it down, focusing on the path ahead, a narrow cleft in the rock face, veiled by icicles like jagged teeth, leading to the hidden caves she knew from her wanderings in exile. "Why risk it?" Thorn murmured, his voice a gravelly thread through the wind's howl, golden eyes flickering open to study her face. Pain etched lines into his brow, deeper than the scars of old battles, and guilt shadowed his gaze like storm clouds over the peaks. He leaned heavier on her, not from weakness alone, but from the unspoken weight of their shared history, the banishment he had decreed, the pack's fear he had failed to quell. Ilara met his stare, her crimson-flecked eyes narrowing against the cold that clawed at her cloak. "Because turning away now would make me the monster they named me," she replied, her tone laced with the bite of frost-bitten truth. Instinct had drawn her to him, that primal pull of wolf to alpha, but she rationalized it as duty, nothing more, a healer's oath to the realm that had cast her out, not to the man who had wielded the blade of rejection. The cave mouth swallowed them whole, its depths a sanctuary carved by ancient glaciers, walls glistening with veins of ice that caught the moonlight in prismatic shards. Ilara eased Thorn onto a ledge of packed snow, softened by her cloak, and knelt beside him, her fingers trembling as she tore strips from her hem to bind the wounds her blood could not fully mend. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and spilled life, mingling with the earthy musk of him, pine resin and wild fur, now tainted by the iron tang that made her fangs ache. Outside, the storm raged fiercer, wind whipping through the cleft like the breath of pursuing hounds. She could hear them now, the iron claws regrouping, their snarls carried on gusts that rattled loose pebbles into the darkness. A common enemy bound them here, the rival pack's ambition a blade poised at the throat of Thorn's rule, and through it, the fragile pups back in the heartlands, their plague-weakened forms a silent plea across the miles. Thorn's hand caught her wrist, his grip firm yet gentle, calluses rough against her chilled skin. "You should flee deeper. They'll scent you. The vampire reek they fear." His words carried the melancholy of a king who had lost too much, heirs fading in their dens, a court riddled with betrayal from his own beta, whose whispers had poisoned the well of trust. Ilara pulled back slightly, but not free, the contact igniting a spark of empathy she hadn't anticipated. In his touch, she felt the echo of her own exile, the isolation of being other, marked by blood that healed yet damned. "And leave you to bleed out? The pups need their king, even a broken one." Her voice softened, unbidden, as she traced the edge of a gash on his shoulder, watching her blood's glow seep into the flesh like moonlight into water. The connection deepened, not with the fire of passion, but a quiet weaving of souls, born from mutual wounds. He had confessed to her once, in the hearth's glow, of the guilt that gnawed at him. Wars waged for power, lives spent like coins in a tyrant's game. Now, in this frozen refuge, she saw the man beneath the crown. Ethical to his core, torn between duty and the mercy he craved but could not grant himself. The howls grew nearer, vibrating through the stone, and Ilara rose, her senses sharpening to the vampire's edge, shadows shifting beyond the cleft, eyes gleaming like embers in the night. She barred the entrance with fallen boulders, her hybrid strength pushing them into place with a grind that echoed like bones settling. Thorn struggled to sit, shifting fully to man form, his dark hair matted with sweat and snow, broad chest rising and falling in labored rhythm. "Together, then," he said, not a command, but a shared resolve, his golden eyes meeting hers with a vulnerability that cracked her defenses. They worked in tandem, her guiding his hands to reinforce the barrier while he whispered of the betrayal. The betas packed with the Ironclaws, using the plague, perhaps a curse from rival shamans, as cover to strike. The Pups' illness was no accident, but a weapon to weaken the bloodline, and Thorn's flight a desperate bid to draw the assassins away from the vulnerable heart of the pack. As the barrier held, the assault came, a frenzy of claws scraping stone, snarls reverberating like thunder in a bottle. One Ironclaw wedged through a gap, its form a blur of steel-gray fur and bared fangs, lunging for Thorn's throat. Ilara met it mid-air, her own shift partial, nails elongating to talons that raked its flank. Blood sprayed. Hers this time, a shallow cut that welled crimson against her pale skin, and the beast yelped, retreating into the storm. Thorn finished it with a precise strike, his roar mingling with hers, a harmony of protection forged in the moment. Panting, they slumped against the wall, the adrenaline fading to leave only the raw ache of proximity. His hand found hers again, lingering, the warmth of his skin a counterpoint to the cave's chill. Empathy bloomed into something tentative, a bond resisted yet undeniable. The wolf in her yearning for pack, the vampire wary of the light he offered. "What is strength?" she murmured, echoing the philosophy that had sustained her in exile. "If not choosing to shelter the one who banished you?" Thorn's gaze softened, guilt etching deeper as he squeezed her hand. "Mercy is the true crown, Ilara. One I fear I've forfeited." Outside, the Ironclaw's howls receded, thwarted for now, but the night stretched long, heavy with unspoken revelations. The vial at her throat warmed once more, a symbol of the blood that could save or doom, pulsing in time with their shared breaths. In that fragile refuge, amid the drip of melting ice and the moon's distant watch, the chasm between them narrowed, empathy's thread pulling them toward an uncharted union. Yet doubt lingered, a spiritual whisper. Could redemption heal what betrayal had torn, or would the thirst claim them before dawn? The cave's chill seeped into Ilara's bones like a lover's reluctant touch, the drip of melting ice a metronome to the storm's fading fury outside. Dawn's first gray light filtered through the cleft, painting the walls in muted silver, but the moon lingered low, a stubborn witness refusing to yield. Thorn lay beside her on the snow-packed ledge, his breathing steadier now, the wounds on his chest closing under the subtle weave of her blood's magic. The vial at her throat had dimmed to a faint ember, its contents halved by the night's desperate offering, and with it came the gnawing void, the thirst, sharper than any blade, coiling in her veins like shadowed vines. She traced the collar's etched phases with trembling fingers, the metal cool against her fevered skin, a talisman that both bound and betrayed her hybrid curse. Thorn stirred, his golden eyes opening to the half-light, locking onto her with an intensity that stirred the air between them. The pain. "It's gone," he murmured, his voice rough as gravel under boot, laced with wonder and the undercurrent of guilt that had shadowed him since the Great Hall's decree. He sat up slowly, broad shoulders flexing. The scars of old battles, silvery lines from claws and betrayals long past, gleaming like frost-kissed steel. Ilara averted her gaze, focusing on the cave's far wall where veins of quartz caught the light, refracting it into fleeting rainbows. The empathy they had forged in the refuge's crucible now pressed against her, insistent as the wind's whisper through cracks in the stone. She had saved him, not from love's blind rush, but from the ethical tether of her healer's soul, rationalizing the pull as duty to the pups whose fragile lives hung in the balance. Yet denial frayed at the edges. His presence ignited something deeper, a spiritual echo of the Deus's ancient pact, where blood and moon intertwined fates. A low rumble echoed from the depths, not thunder, but something primal, vibrating through the earth like the mountain's hidden heartbeat. Alara's senses sharpened, the vampire within her awakening to the scent of damp stone and something older, moss and root, mingled with the faint, acrid bite of ritual smoke. "What is this place?" Thorn asked, rising to his feet with a king's innate grace, though his hand lingered near hers, a silent anchor. She shook her head, memories surfacing unbidden. As a child in the pack's fringes, before the whispers of vampire witch took root, her mother had spoken of these caves as veins of the earth, conduits to the Deuce's wisdom. "A sanctuary," she replied, her voice soft, threaded with the melancholy of lost innocence. "Or a grave, depending on what seeks you." They ventured deeper, the passage narrowing to a throat of rock that forced them close, shoulders brushing in the dimness. The air grew thicker, warmer, carrying the murmur of underground waters and the distant howl of wind above. Alara's hand found the vial again, its warmth pulsing in rhythm with her steps, guiding her like a compass forged in starlight. The thirst clawed higher, demanding, but she quelled it with breaths drawn deep, tasting the metallic tang of Thorn's lingering blood on her skin. He walked beside her now, not as king to exile, but as equal in peril, his ethical core shining through the guilt that etched his features. "The beta's treachery runs deeper than I feared," he confessed, voice echoing off the walls like a prayer in a temple. "He poisoned the pups with a shaman's curse, twisted from old blood rites to shatter my line. I fled to draw them out, but without you, the realm crumbles." The passage opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, the floor a mosaic of frozen pools reflecting the moon's borrowed light from a jagged skylight above. At the center stood an altar of black stone, veined with quartz that glowed faintly, and upon it lay relics of forgotten eras, a rusted dagger, wilted herbs, and a basin etched with lunar symbols. The air hummed with power, spiritual and raw, stirring Alara's blood to a simmer. She approached, drawn inexorably, the collar burning against her chest, as if the Deusa herself breathed through it. Thorn followed, his presence a steady heat at her back, curiosity overriding the wariness in his eyes. As her fingers brushed the basin's rim, a vision seized her. Not gentle, but visceral, crashing like a wave of blood and moonlight. The chamber blurred, the walls dissolving into the pack's heartlands under a blood moon, the pups writhing in their dens, fur matted with fever sweat, tiny chests heaving in futile gasps. Thorn's heirs, his legacy, eyes dimming like dying embers. But woven through the torment was a thread of revelation, her blood, not as curse, but as key. The hybrid essence, born of a forbidden union under the Deuce's gaze, held the antidote to the plague, a purification that no wolf's howl or shaman's chant could match. It manifested now in her mind's eye, the vial shattering in ethereal light, her crimson life force flooding the vision, knitting the pups' forms whole, their howls rising in joyous chorus. Yet the cost loomed. Each healing would drain her, stirring the vampire's feral hunger until it consumed, unless balanced by a bond true and deep. Alara gasped, stumbling back, the vision releasing her with a shudder that left her knees weak. Thorn caught her, his arms encircling her waist, strong and unyielding, the scent of pine and earth enveloping her like a cloak against the chill. "What did you see?" he demanded, voice urgent, golden eyes searching hers with a desperation that cracked his royal facade. She met his gaze, the revelation's weight pressing on her tongue, heavy as the collar's chain. "Your pups. They're dying not from plague alone, but a curse meant to end your bloodline. My blood. This cursed gift, it's the only salve. The Deusa marked me for this, Thorn. I'm the pathfinder, the healer they feared." His breath hitched, guilt and awe warring in his expression, the ethical king confronting the destiny he had denied. "I banished you to save them from what I thought was poison," he whispered, hand rising to trace the collar, fingers lingering on the vial's glow. But you're the redemption I sought and spurned. The connection surged, no longer resisted but acknowledged, a spiritual fire kindling in the chamber's depths. Yet dilemma shadowed the light. To embrace her gift meant confronting the pack's fear, his past decree, and the thirst that could turn savior to destroyer. The moon's light pulsed through the skylight, bathing them in silver, blood's promise hanging like a blade. What is fate, Alara wondered, if not the choice to wield a power that could heal a kingdom or shatter her soul? Thorn's hold tightened, a vow unspoken, as the chamber's hum faded to silence, leaving only the echo of possibility and peril in the frozen heart of the mountain. The chamber's hum lingered in Alara's veins like a half-forgotten incantation, the moon's silver light fracturing across the altar's relics as if the Deusa herself wept shards of judgment. Thorn's arms remained around her, a cage of warmth and resolve, but she pulled away gently, the vial at her throat cooling to a somber pulse, its glow a reminder of the blood that bound them to this precipice. The vision's echoes clawed at her mind, the pups' fevered whimpers, the curse's insidious weave, her essence as the fragile key to their survival. Yet revelation carried thorns. It demanded confrontation, dragging the shadows of the past into the light where they could no longer be ignored. "We cannot hide here forever," Thorn said, his voice a low rumble that stirred the quartz veins in the stone, golden eyes hardening with the king's unyielding ethic. Guilt still etched his features, deeper now, a map of regrets from the decree that had hurled her into exile. But duty sharpened his gaze like a blade drawn for war. The Beta, Kyle, must answer for this treachery, and the Iron Claws. They circle the heartlands even now, scenting weakness. He rose, offering her a hand, his calloused palm rough against her chilled fingers, pulling her into the fray of decision. Ilara hesitated, the thirst simmering low in her belly, a vampire's whisper urging flight into the wilds where freedom tasted of solitude and endless night. Love or liberty? The question coiled around her heart, resisted as fiercely as the bond that tugged at her wolf's soul. Forgiveness seemed a fool's crown, yet war would drown the pups in blood before her gift could reach them. They emerged from the caves as dawn bled crimson across the snow-capped peaks, the storm's remnants swirling in lazy eddies that carried the distant clamor of howls. Not retreat, but rally. Thorn shifted partially, his form a blend of man and beast, fur rippling along his shoulders as he scented the air, pine and earth mingling with the acrid bite of smoke from distant fires. Alara walked beside him, her cloak mended with strips of shadow, the collar's chain a constant weight, its vial swaying like a pendulum of fate. The path wound upward through the Frostfang's jagged spine, pines groaning under ice burdens, their branches clawing the sky like supplicants to the fading moon. Her bare feet pressed into the snow, each step a sensory anchor, cold seeping through her soles, numbing the ache of old wounds, while the wind tugged at her hair, whispering of the pack's fractured loyalty. The confrontation came at the ravine's rim, where the world opened to the valley below. The heartlands sprawled in frozen majesty, the pack's stronghold a cluster of stone dens and torchlit walls under siege. Ironclaw banners fluttered like ravens' wings, their warriors a tide of gray fur and steel, clashing against Thorn's loyalists in a symphony of snarls and steel. Blood stained the snow in vivid arcs, the metallic tang rising on the breeze to assail Alara's senses, sharpening her fangs until she tasted iron on her tongue. At the fore stood Kyle, the Beta turned traitor, his sleek black pelt scarred from the night's skirmishes, eyes gleaming with ambitious fire as he directed the assault. Beside him loomed the Iron Claw Alpha, a hulking brute named Grimfang, his maw dripping crimson from a fresh kill, the curse's architect whose shamans had woven plague into the pup's veins. Thorn's roar shattered the air, a thunderclap that halted the melee, wolves freezing mid-lunge as he crested the ridge. "Kyle, face me, betrayer." His voice carried the weight of a crown forged in loss, ethical fury burning brighter than the torches below. Alara stood at his flank, her presence a silent storm, the vial glowing faintly as if the Deusa approved this reckoning. The pack's eyes turned, some loyal, snarling defiance, others wavering, the fear of her vampire taint flickering in their gazes. Kyle shifted to man form, his lean frame clad in ragged furs, a sneer twisting his lips as he climbed the slope, Grimfang at his heels. "The king returns, bloodied and broken," Kyle mocked, voice slick as oil on ice. "Your pups gasp their last while you play at heroism. The curse was mercy, ending a weak line before it dooms us all." Thorn lunged, claws extended, but Alara's hand on his arm stayed him, her touch a spark of restraint amid the rage. The moral crux pressed upon her. War would sate vengeance, spilling rivers of blood that her thirst might drink, granting the freedom of exile's endless roam. Yet forgiveness, for the pack, for Thorn's decree born of desperate fear, meant chaining herself to this realm, offering her blood as balm, risking the vampire's unraveling. "The plague is no natural ill," she declared, stepping forward, her voice cutting through the wind like a blade of moonlight. Crimson flecked her eyes, the hybrid power manifesting in a subtle aura that made the wolves recoil. "It's your doing, Kyle, twisted from forbidden rites, but I am the Deusa's pathfinder. My blood holds the cure." Kyle's laugh barked harsh, but doubt shadowed his eyes as Grimfang growled, circling with predatory grace. "A vampire whore's lie. We'll end you both. Claim the throne untainted." The alpha rival charged, a blur of fangs and fury, slamming into Thorn with bone-cracking force. They tumbled into the snow, a whirlwind of claws rending fur. Blood spraying in hot mists that Alara dodged with vampiric speed. She whirled on Kyle, who shifted and sprang, his jaws aiming for her throat. Instinct surged. She met him with elongated nails, raking his flank deep enough to draw a yelp, the taste of his blood on the air fueling her restraint's fray. Thorn broke free from Grimfang, roaring as he pinned the rival, golden eyes blazing with the choice that mirrored hers. Kill the traitor and ignite endless war, or seek a path of mercy that might redeem the fractured pack. Ilara's fingers closed around the vial, shattering its crystalline hold in a burst of light, her blood welling free to drip onto the snow, steaming with ethereal power. "Enough!" she cried, the essence spreading like veins of fire. A spiritual ward that halted the combatants, forcing shifts back to human forms amid gasps of awe and fear. Kyle staggered, the curse's echo in his veins recoiling from her purity, while Grimfang snarled, wounded pride twisting his snarl. Thorn rose, bloodied but unbowed, his hand finding hers in the sudden hush, the bond no longer denied, but a tether of shared will. "Choose, Kyle," Thorn demanded, voice steady as ancient stone. "Surrender the right's antidote, or face the Deusa's judgment through her chosen." The beta's eyes darted, ambition warring with survival, the pack murmuring behind them, whispers of redemption, of the Omega they had scorned now standing as savior. Ilara felt the weight of it all, the pull toward freedom's cold embrace, the temptation of war's savage release against the ethical flame of compassion that could heal a dying legacy. Forgiveness tasted of vulnerability, a moral gamble where love emerged not as reward, but as the forge of rebirth. As Kale knelt, broken whispers spilling the curse's reversal, the moon dipped toward horizon, casting long shadows over the bloodied field. Yet doubt lingered in Alara's soul, a spiritual thorn. Could she trust this fragile peace, or would the past's claws drag them into deeper night? Thorn's gaze met hers, heavy with unspoken plea, the choice hanging like blood on the wind. Unity or unraveling under the Deusa's unblinking eye. The valley's hush fell like a shroud woven from the moon's final sigh. The bloodied snow a canvas of choices etched in crimson and frost. Ilara stood at the ridge's edge, her hand still clasped in thorns, the shattered vial's remnants scattered at her feet like fallen stars, their glow fading into the dawn's encroaching pallor. Kyle knelt in the slush, his form diminished. The beta's arrogance crumbled under the weight of exposure, his whispers unraveling the curse's dark weave, a shaman's venom drawn from shadowed roots, meant to sever the blackthorn line forever. The Ironclaws retreated into the mist-shrouded pines, Grimfang's defeated snarl echoing like a dying wind, their alliance fractured by the revelation of Ilara's power. The pack gathered below, a sea of wary eyes and shifting furs, their howls silenced by awe and the lingering fear of her crimson gaze. Yet in Ilara's chest the thirst roared triumphant, a feral tide rising from the blood she had spilled, demanding recompense in the form of lives, wolf or otherwise. Thorn's grip tightened, his golden eyes searching hers amid the gathering light, the ethical king stripped to the bone of his guilt. "You've given them the key," he murmured, voice rough as the grind of ice under paw, his breath warm against the chill that clawed her skin. "The pups. They can be saved." But his words carried the shadow of what came next. The journey back to the Heartlands, where her blood would be drawn in ritual under the Deus's watch, mending the fragile whelps one drop at a time. Each offering would hollow her, the vampire's hunger amplifying until it threatened to consume not just her restraint, but the fragile union blooming between them. Freedom whispered from the wild peaks beyond, a solitary path where she could roam unburdened, her hybrid curse a solitary flame rather than a beacon for the damned. Yet the wolf within yearned for pack, for the redemption of those who had scorned her, and for the man whose touch now anchored her against the storm. She pulled away, stepping toward the slope, the snow yielding softly under her bare feet, each crunch a sensory echo of rebirth's tentative steps. The wind carried the scent of smoke from the dens below, torches rekindled, the pack's loyalists tending the wounded, their murmurs rising like prayers to the fading moon. Ilara's collar hung empty now, its chain a light burden around her neck, the vial's absence a void that mirrored the ache in her soul. Sacrifice loomed as the only true cure, not just her blood, but the surrender of isolation, weaving her fate to Thorn's throne and the realm's fragile peace. Love, she realized, was no gentle reward, but a forge of fire and blood, tempering wounds into strength. "What is rebirth?" she whispered to the dawn, her voice threading through the air like silver smoke, "if not choosing the chain that heals?" The descent blurred into a procession of shadowed forms, Thorn at her side, his presence a steady heat against the morning's bite. The pack parted before them, their eyes tracing the pale curve of her throat where the collar gleamed. No longer a mark of curse, but of destiny unveiled. Cale was bound in iron chains, forged in the castle's depths, his confession spilling forth under Thorn's unyielding gaze, the beta's ambition born of resentment, twisted by promises of power from Grimfang's shamans. Forgiveness was no easy mantle. Ilara felt the pack's stares like thorns, their past snarls of vampire witch echoing in the silence. Yet as they reached the stronghold's gates, carved with lunar runes that now seemed to pulse in welcome, a pup's faint whimper pierced the air from the healing dens. Thorn's heirs, 3 tiny forms swaddled in furs, their fur matted and eyes half-lidded, lay in the central chamber, the air thick with the scent of fever and herbs crushed underfoot. Ilara knelt beside them, the stone floor cold against her knees, her fingers trembling as she pricked her wrist with a shard of the vial's crystal. Crimson welled, bright and vital, dripping into a silver bowl etched with the Deus's phases, the same symbols that adorned her collar. The first pup, a whelp with fur like Thorn's midnight mane, stirred as the blood touched its tongue, administered by the healer's careful hand. A gasp escaped it, tiny chest rising stronger, the curse's shadow fleeing like mist before sun. The pack watched from the thresholds, breaths held, the fire in the hearth crackling like applause from the spirits. One by one, the pups revived, their eyes opening to the world with howls that built to a chorus, pure and joyous, echoing through the halls like the moon's own song. Tears traced Ilara's cheeks, hot against the chill, mingling with the blood that stained her hands, proof of the Renacimento she had chosen, not for glory, but for the ethical flame that burned brighter than vengeance. Thorn knelt beside her, his arm encircling her waist, drawing her into the warmth of his frame as the pups nuzzled against them both. The bond sealed in that moment, no longer resisted but embraced, a union forged in sacrifice's crucible. His lips brushed her temple, a tender vow amid the hearth's glow, golden eyes reflecting the fire's dance. "You've healed more than flesh," he said, voice laced with the melancholy of a king reborn. "You've mended the soul of this realm, and mine." The thirst still lingered, a quiet undercurrent she would tame together with him, balanced by the pack's tentative acceptance, their heads bowing in reverence to the Omega who had transcended rejection. Outside, the moon slipped below the peaks, yielding to the sun's golden rise, casting long shadows that promised not endless winter, but a spring of blood and renewal. In the chamber's warmth, as the pups' playful yips filled the air, Ilara traced the empty collar's chain, its links a symbol of the power she had given freely. Rebirth was no solitary dawn, but a shared light, where love proved itself through the scars it mended, the choices that bound rather than broke. The Diusa's whisper faded on the wind, a spiritual benediction. Every wound carried a healer's hand, every exile a path to throne. And in Thorn's embrace, under the hearth's eternal flame, Ilara found her place, not as outcast, but as queen of the healed heart. If your heart beat alongside ours, comment and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.